What is the move that Aryan chooses? He goes 1 e4. Now, in order to beat Magnus, never easy. And there you see Magnus getting all his pieces on their proper squares before he's about to begin. And a sip of water. If you want to play for a solid game, you can go e4, e5. But will Magnus just be happy with a draw? Not really. I think he wants to play for a win, and that's why he goes for the Caro-Kann. c6 played. And Aryan now goes d4. Magnus wears his player card and goes d5, and he pushes his pawn, the advanced variation of the Caro-Kann. Magnus brings his bishop out. This is the main move against the advanced variation, and g4, one of the most aggressive ways to meet this position. And now for Magnus, there are some interesting options. You can go back here. You can also provoke f3 by bishop e4, which is what he does, and then go back. f3, and now bishop g6. This is not the most common way to play, but it definitely creates some new positions and new challenges. Now Aryan can push h4, but Magnus will meet it with h5. He goes for this very interesting pawn sack e6. If you were to take fe6, then these two double pawns do block in the bishop, and that's the reason why Magnus goes queen d6, and he says, I'm going to take this pawn with my queen. So you can't really, give me this passive position for my bishop. And Aryan has to now decide what is to be done with that pawn. He takes on f7, which is logical move. And now Magnus can take it back with his bishop. The upside to this is that now his bishop on f8 won't be closed. You can get it out from e5. The bishop can develop from there. Bishop takes f7 has been played. And Aryan Tari now plays his knight to c3. He's at 1 hour 32 minutes. Magnus has taken around 9 minutes on the clock, which means that Aryan is better prepared out of the opening. Knight to c3, and Magnus plays his knight to d7. He wants to break with e5 now. If given an opportunity, he would love to do that. So let's say you go knight e2, then e5, and black is already doing well. That's the reason why Aryan goes for the move f4. This stops e5. Yes, it does weaken the e4 square, but now look at the space that white has in the position. Magnus pushes his pawn to h5, and he tells his opponent that you can't play h3 because I'll take, and your rook would be hanging. So you will have to push the pawn, but when you do so, your f5 square will get weakened. So Magnus playing for some squares there. Aryan has to push his pawn. He does so. g5 on the board. This is a very strategic battle where white has weaknesses, but at the same time he has more space while black is very, very cramped. e6 played by Magnus. Now, his knight does seem like it will go to f5. Knight f3 is a good move because anyway your knight is looking at the e5 square. So there are weaknesses in both camps. Black has to figure out how each of his piece will play in this position. Will the knight go to g6? Will it go to f5? If that is the case, what about this bishop on f7? What about the bishop on f8? There are too many questions. If you go g6 and bishop g7, then yes, this bishop is on a good diagonal, but what about the light squared bishop? It's completely boxed in. He goes bishop to d3, and this is a pretty good move by Aryan, but Magnus now makes a very interesting decision, because he needs to sort of get g6 in to develop his bishop here, but he doesn't want his bishop shut back on f7, so he plays h4 so that the bishop can come out this way, and then he can play g6. So in the limited space that he has, Magnus is sort of getting all his pieces working together. Short castles by white, and now Magnus gets bishop h5. This is a good move, and he's pinned the knight here. But I like Aryan's next move, queen e1. He's not only looking at the e6 pawn, but also at the h4 pawn. And Magnus puts his pawn on g6. Now actually, he can win a pawn here, Aryan. But I think Magnus is fine with it, and Aryan does not really care about the pawn. He goes knight e5. He says that it's much more important for my knight to be on a central square than winning this pawn. Bishop comes to g7. What an interesting position this is, with both sides actually playing very unconventionally. And now Aryan develops his final piece. He's ready to get it rolling. The rook can come into the game. Just to note that queen takes h4 would not have been a great move because of bishop e2, and here I want to pick up the rook. So he goes bishop d2, knight comes out to f5. Now this knight is attacking the d4 pawn. He goes knight to a4, and his point is that if you were to take knight takes here, then there is knight takes d7, queen takes d7, c3 pushing the knight away, and knight c5, and then there is problems here on the e6 square. So Magnus very quickly chops off the knight on e5, and he understands super quick that actually it was his bishop that had to go and not his knight, because knights thrive better in closed positions and also controls the c5 square. Now Aryan also exchanges his bishop for the knight, and of course Magnus cannot play e takes f5 because of e6 and then the queen entering the e5 square. So he takes with the g pawn. Pawn up to h3. And taking stock of the position here, Magnus goes king f7, but his king would not be like completely safe here. Also, bishop to b4 could become a big menace. Right now it's not possible because the g5 pawn is hanging. King h2 makes lot of sense. Your king is safely tucked in on the h file, and the rook can come in via the g file. Pawn to b6. Magnus takes control over the c5 square and also wants to play c5, but Aryan goes b4. Nice move. He stops c5. This has been quite a high quality game by Aryan Tari until now, matching Magnus move for move. Knight goes back to f8 here, and Magnus is looking at his knight settling down on the g6 square. Meanwhile, Aryan Tari brings his knight back to b2. His knight will be well positioned on d3, where it controls the c5 break and also the f4 square. c5. Magnus is ready to break open the position. This is again ambitious play by Magnus, but this could become risky. Take. He takes it. Magnus takes back. And now a logical move would be to take. Magnus's pen just falls on the board and he apologizes for that. Take and open up the position. But Aryan, who is on 20 minutes now with another 16 moves to make, has some different intentions. He goes knight d3. and he's attacking this pawn. The best move now is to take cd4, and black has a great position, completely fine. Magnus now, he gets tempted by this idea of pushing the pawn, and look at the bar, it has risen so much up. But what is the winning move here? Is it knight c5, just putting your knight on the c5 square? Not really. The classy move here, try to think what is the winning move. Aryan has 20 minutes to figure out, but the most difficult part is that he doesn't realize this is the critical moment in the game. There's no one to tell him. The right move here is g6 check, and you might think, what's happening here? Let's just say you take the pawn, then I go knight to c5. Now what has changed here is not the fact that the knight suddenly is very powerful, but because you have cleared the g5 square. So if Magnus goes something like rook b8, then in comes the move queen c1, and you are threatening this. So a sample line could go rook b5, a4, rook b6, bishop enters, and then bishop joins in here, and then the queen joins in, and already this is so difficult position. But I really like this move g6. It's such a thematic pawn sacrifice to clear a square, get the rook to g1. Can Aryan Tari find this entire idea with g6? Because if you go knight c5, then knight g6, and suddenly you don't have this entire front open for your rook and bishop. This is a very, very key moment in the entire game, because two things have happened. One is that you are getting this g6 move. Second is you are getting the c5 square for your knight. Rook can go here and the bishop can go here. Magnus is moving around here. He knows that there is something to worry about in this position. Aryan has been thinking for close to a minute, and this is the thing about good players. They can sometimes sense that the critical moment is around. Now, how much do they trust their intuition would determine whether they are able to find the move or not. But will Aryan find this move g6? Not really. He goes knight f4, and you can see that this position no longer is as better as it would have been if he had played it. Knight g6 played. Now there's a small tactical idea here which should have been tried by Aryan to get his rook in, and maybe with the bishop coming here, this is quite dangerous. Instead he goes knight g6, and this time Magnus's position is now completely fine. He can take with the bishop, he can also take with the king, and now there's just very few open files. He takes with the king, and it seems very difficult that Aryan can now win this position, because yes, you have the b file, but black can also control it. Yes, you can come from here, but that's only one side of the board. Queen goes to e3, and now here Magnus has a very nice move, maybe very similar to what Aryan had. He has this move c3, clearing off queen takes c3 and rook c8, clearing the c file, have the c4 square, and also attacking the c2 pawn, which would be very strong. So two moves here, g6 in Magnus's, like for Aryan Tari, and now c3 for Magnus Carlsen. But Magnus does not give the pawn. He goes rook h b8, and for Aryan, who is now down to 13 minutes, he goes rook a b1. Well, for sure his chances of winning this game are quite dim now, as of now. Magnus goes rook b6, very logical move. If you take here, then I'll take with the pawn, and my rook opens up and attacks your a2 pawn. So nice move. Queen c3 played by Aryan, and now you can go rook b8. You can also go queen b7. He goes queen to b7. Well, there was an interesting move here, which was bishop e2, rook e1, takes, and f4. And then you want to get in here, play f3. And this was actually a great position for black. But after queen b7, rook takes b6, it feels like Aryan is doing fine. Queen takes b6 and now queen a3 to try and enter down this path, giving up the d4 pawn. He goes bishop c1 and offers a draw. Very interesting decision by Aryan to offer a draw, because on one hand he is maybe going to get a half a point, but on the other hand he'll get eliminated. And for Magnus, his position is better. He can play the move queen b1, entering the position, pinning it here. Next move, his rook can go to b8, and he can already try and win this, because every draw that he takes, he does lose couple of elo points. But in the World Cup, the most important thing is to qualify to the next round, and you can see Magnus sort of grappling with these questions as he sits down and tries to assess whether he should play for a win or he should just agree to a draw. And what would be Magnus's decision here? Generally, he's a big fighter and would like to sort of play on, because here there is so much more left to play. But there you see his face. He says, I agree, let's draw the game.